Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. Today on the show, we have Paige Velasquez Buddy. She is the CEO of Zilker Media, and she wrote the KevinMD article, How to Develop a Mission-Driven Personal Brand. Paige, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on.
So again, to your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Sure. I had an interesting path getting into marketing in general. While I was attending the University of Texas at Austin in a roundabout way, I ended up falling in love with the art of storytelling in marketing. That wasn't even what I sought out to study. And so one of my first jobs out of college was at a book marketing agency called Shelton Interactive. And we focused mainly on representing more than 30 New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling authors. And so during that time at Shelton Interactive, I had the opportunity to work with several physicians and healthcare professionals who were on their journey of writing and publishing their books. And as we worked with these physicians to establish their online presence for their book launch and their personal brands, it was just very incredible to see the bigger impact that they were able to make even beyond the book, and with so many physicians and so many of their patients. And so that agency that was focused on representing authors ended up being acquired in 2016. And so in 2017, that founder of that agency, Rusty Shelton, and several team members from that original Shelton Interactive team, we started a new agency, which is now Zilker Media. And we have had just the opportunity to not only work with authors, but also thought leaders and physicians and companies to really build what we call people-driven brands.
Wonderful. And one of the themes that come up consistently in this podcast is storytelling in healthcare. Now, I'm
Sure.
interested in hearing from the perspective of a marketer, why is
Mhm.
storytelling important in medicine and healthcare?
Yeah, it's so important, especially for clinicians who are seeing patients day to day. It's harder to make an impact just beyond the people that you're able to fit within your schedule. If you're able to storytell and bring that to life online as well through different mediums, you broaden your reach and you broaden the impact that you're able to make. And I think that's what is so powerful for physicians to focus on, looking at themselves as a brand. And many physicians don't see themselves as a brand. But it's extremely powerful, the trust that you can build with patients, and the trust that you can build with other physicians, and how you can make an impact in the world doing so.
So that leads us into your KevinMD article, How to Develop a Mission-Driven Personal Brand. Now, for those who haven't read your article, can you just walk my audience through it and maybe share the story of why you decided to write it?
Sure. I was passionate to write this article, as I mentioned before. Time and time again, we've seen that vast impact that goes beyond the day-to-day of patient care that physicians can make when they really focus on building that personal brand. And it's really interesting because most physicians, they won't think of themselves as a brand. In fact, many tend to cringe when they hear the word personal branding because they perceive it as either overly self-promotional or as an ego-driven tactic. But when you think about personal branding for physicians, the way I want you to think about it is with a mission-driven focus. So go into it with the mindset that you have an opportunity to broaden the way that you teach and you educate others, and whether that's patients or other physicians or even the healthcare system. When you develop that personal brand, it can provide the platform that you need to make an even greater impact with your work. And this is something, Kevin, that you've done so well and you've pioneered throughout the years. Every physician that I've ever spoken to highly respects your website and wants to contribute to that community. And that's powerful, because that's a community that you've built online. And when you think about that long term, building your personal brand can allow you to grow your practice. It can allow you to generate new revenue streams, transition into a new phase of your career. And that path is going to look different for every physician. And so a few things is I wanted to give practical steps that physicians can take today to start making this transition and thinking of themselves like a brand.
Now let's go into those practical steps. So if I'm a practicing physician and I have no brand to speak of, I don't have an online presence, I don't have a website. Now, if you could just take me through step by step, where should I start?
Absolutely. The first place to start is understanding what Google says about you. Ultimately, for physicians, it's all about owning your first impression online. And first impressions, they're no longer happening when someone calls your clinic or they're walking into your practice. They're now happening on the first page of Google when someone types in your name. And so if a patient has referred you or an institution is considering hiring you, or even if a journalist is looking for an expert to review, the first thing that they're going to do is Google your name. And when you Google a physician's name, the most common results that tend to populate, that first result is typically linked to your institution website or your practice website, but the following results on page 1 of Google are typically those review pages. And we've all seen those, the health grades, the vitals, and most of these review profiles are not filled out, and it's leaving it up to others to control that narrative about you. So you can be proactive in positioning yourself as an expert and thought leader in your field with that first impression so that you're giving them a reason to pick up the phone and call. Now, to own that first impression online, you must focus on optimizing your personal website or social media channels. And if you're not ready to focus on building that personal website at the moment, that's okay. I still recommend going and buying your URL. All you have to do is go to GoDaddy.com, type in your first name, last name, and I also highly recommend including your credentials within that URL, whether that's MD, PhD, and buy the .com. Now, for most people, this is only going to be a $12 purchase, and it is protection for your personal brand. The way I want you to think about it is that you're buying a plot of land that you're going to reserve to build on later. And if you're not ready to build that website yet, the best way that you can control what populates on that page 1 of Google is focusing on updating that LinkedIn profile. And this is a social media channel that's almost like a mini website because it holds your digital CV, it holds your professional biography, it also holds your connections and recommendations. You can also write articles on that website just like a blog. And so it holds a lot of weight when it comes to optimizing your name for search. And so if you're not ready for that website phase yet to devote the time and resources, which is okay, you can also just focus on a channel like LinkedIn to do that in the meantime. And when you start to build your platform, remember that the content that you put out doesn't have to be all on you. And so that's one thing that I've heard time and time again is a barrier for physicians to join social media, is they're afraid I don't have the time or the resources. And that's okay. We understand that job is incredibly demanding. So focus when you're putting out content, whether it's social media or your blog, start thinking of yourself as the editor of your own newspaper. And when you think about newspapers, it includes various content. It's not all op-eds. And so focus on writing about 1/3 of your content on news-driven topics, which, right now, of course, are going to be, COVID. It's going to be New Year's resolutions, a healthy look on 2021. The other portion of content, that's going to be relationship driven. So just like we're doing right now, invite others onto your platform to shine a spotlight on their expertise and give that additional value to your audience. And then you can reserve the smallest amount of your content for what we call that you-driven content. Those are those op-eds, opinion pieces. But I will caution you, if you focus on filling your content with too many of those op-eds or you-driven content, it's going to be hard to sustain that. And ultimately, it might turn your audiences away. So the more that you can involve other people and the more that you can focus on timely news topics that your audience is concerned about, that's going to be what drives you forward in building your platform.
One of the things that you mentioned was the importance of that first page or even that first selection on a Google search. A lot of times, as you mentioned, it is taken up by these clinician review sites. And I've had a lot of doctors create their own pieces of the web, whether it's a LinkedIn profile or website, but it still doesn't quite get up to the level of something that's already established. So what do you suggest physicians do in that case?
Absolutely. Everything with Google takes time, and it's what we call SEO, which stands for search engine optimization. Now, if you're creating your own website, that is one of the quickest ways for you to earn a number 2 or number 1 spot whenever you search your name. The goal there is to provide consistent content, though. So to start a blog, that is the best way to earn quick up the rankings on Google. And so if you start a blog, the goal is to keep consistent. So really decide, how much time can I dedicate? And if that's once a month, I would start out there and make sure that you're consistent with that and work on getting up to a frequency that's either bi-weekly, which is every other week, or if you can, weekly. Now remember, you don't have to be the one that is solely writing the blog. If you have a practice with other physicians, you can maybe trade off. You could also do interview series, whether that's a podcast like this, or you could have them write an article or fill out a series of questions that you can post on your website. And you could also write a response to new research or studies that are coming out. If you're focusing more on social media, this is another great way to also own results on page 1. You want those social media channels to pull up on those page 1 results. And so it's all about frequency. So making sure that you're keeping those up to date. So for example, we talked about LinkedIn. LinkedIn also has a posting feature and a blog feature. Again, if monthly is the frequency that you can commit to right now, go ahead and commit to that. But after time, you'll see those channels start to pull up onto page 1 of Google.
What separates a mission-driven brand from just simple online reputation? What are some specific things that physicians can do to make their content mission-driven?
One exercise that we love to do with physicians is working with them to create their own mission statement. And this is a simple 1 or 2 sentences. And anytime you're creating any piece of content or you're doing an interview, you really want to focus on, how does this connect to that mission? And that's a good radar for everyone to really look at. Okay, how do I continue living my mission out? Another good way is to involve others as much as possible. So again, it's not perceived as that me, overly promotional strategy. It's more of, how can we show light on other experts who are also doing other great things in our industry and can add value to your audience.
We're talking to Paige Velasquez-Buddy. She is the CEO of Zilker Media, and she wrote the KevinMD article, How to Develop a Mission-Driven Personal Brand. Paige, there are so many, as you know, social media channels out there. You mentioned LinkedIn, there's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Now, a lot of doctors I talk to, when it comes to online reputation, are overwhelmed by the number of choices. Now, what is your approach in terms of suggesting which social media platforms physicians should be on?
Absolutely, and that's a question I get a lot, because as you mentioned, physicians get overwhelmed with trying to do all the marketing initiatives at once. And it's one of the most demanding jobs in the world to have. And so one simple piece of advice is understanding that not all marketing initiatives have to be rolled out at once. Really focus on learning one social media channel at a time. A very popular social media channel that has been utilized over the last couple of years for the healthcare community has been Twitter. There are several Twitter chats going on among physicians. It's also a really good place to build relationships. And I would encourage you not to focus on the amount of followers, but focus on the amount of digital relationships that you're building with others. And once you feel comfortable in that environment, maybe shift and add more intention and time to LinkedIn and start learning that system and really understanding, how can you cultivate relationships there as well. So focus on one channel at a time and make sure that you're keeping it strategic in the sense that you're focused on building those relationships, not the amount of followers that you have.
Now, when you talk to physicians about building a brand, one of the things that you had mentioned earlier is that you're going to get a little bit of pushback from some doctors who don't believe in an online presence and believe that medicine
Right.
should only be in the exam room. Now, has that pushback lessened over the years that you've been doing this? Are you finding that physicians today are more accepting and embrace being online?
I believe so, and I believe we've seen that trend over the past couple of years, just as social media has emerged. It's very interesting. There's a strong community now on Twitter, especially. There are micro media outlets dedicated to physicians and dedicated to the healthcare industry that are craving content from physicians, and we really start to see the impact that can make to not only patients, but also to the healthcare industry and moving that forward.
And my final question, Paige, what is your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it all comes down to focusing on that mission-driven thought leadership to ultimately make that bigger impact. And I always love asking physicians, why did you enter the healthcare industry in the first place? And their answers are always inspiring. And so I focus in with them on remembering that mission, craft that mission statement for yourself, and focus on extending that reach to share it. And we believe so much in the physician voice that we even focused our time in the beginning of COVID, which was March and April when everything got shut down, to specifically filming a course for physicians to share every tool and strategy that we had to help them amplify their voice and spread their mission, because we knew that the communities, especially during this time, that are focused on the front lines battling this pandemic, their voice needs to be heard.
Paige, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin.